Everyone's favorite Twitter hardware leaker is back at it again with Copite 7 Kimmy saying RTX 4060 Ti has a very short reference board. The PG190 still uses CEM5 connector. 8106-350-A1, 4,352 floating point 32 units, and we've got 8 gigabytes of 18 gigabit per second GDDR6 with 32 megabyte L2 cache and 220 watt power draw. Now, lots of numbers mean nothing without context, and especially if some of you guys are like, I don't know what a 32ML2 is. So things make the most sense when you reference them to other things. And so what we have here is videocards.com was very quick to report on this and to stack it up in one of their nice little specs sheets so you can actually see how these specs compare to the rest of the lineup. Now, it's important to understand what we're looking at here when we make these comparisons. Number one, we know exactly what the 4090 is and how it performs, and same thing about the 4080. All of these specs are for sure, and these cards actually exist in our hands. Now, the rest of this is rumors. However, I will say that the 4070 Ti specs, we are pretty much 100% sure about. For example, once again, we see 4070 Ti specs being leaked by an actual AIB card manufacturer with their, the photos of the boxes and everything. And I'm not going to dig too deeply into this because I've reported on this a million times, but it's basically exactly the 3080 12 gigabyte that got unlaunched. Remember, originally there was going to be 4080s. There was going to be two 4080s, a 4080 16 gigabyte, which we actually got, and then a 12 gigabyte, which Nvidia decided to unlaunch, and then is going to be relaunched under the name 4070 Ti. That's been confirmed by many, many sources, including other AIB manufacturers at this point. So we're pretty sure exactly what those specs are going to be. Less sure on the performance, although Nvidia themselves did release some performance graphs for the 4080 12 gigabyte before they unlaunched it, and there was a pretty significant step down from the 4080 16 gigabyte, which we actually got, to this card. And we're expecting to see this launched around CES, which would be early January. Now, we've seen some rumored 4070 specs. These are much less sure. These were only leaked recently by, once again, Copite 7 Kimmy, and I've reported on that recently, and now we're seeing the 4060 Ti specs. So basically, the first two here we absolutely know for sure. The third one, 4070 Ti, we're pretty confident about. And then the 70 and the 60, it's just if Copite is right, okay? So that's where we are on confidence on these things. But if you take a look at how cut down this is, I honestly, I don't know, guys. Okay, really pricing is what's going to matter, because if it's cheap enough, this could still be good. But look at how much this drops off. Like, for example, in the memories and memory bus. So 4060 Ti, again, rumor here is that it's still at 8 gigabytes, cut down from the 12 gigabytes on the 4070. And also notice, if you were like, what is the whole AD106 thing it was saying there? So that's the actual GPU die, that's on the card. So, for example, the 102 is the biggest one, and that's on the 4090, and it's using almost the full 102 die, although there is a little room for us to maybe get a 4090 Ti. Then the 4080 16 gigabytes on a cut-down version, the AD103, and then the 4070 Ti is on a AD104, and this is one of the main reasons why people objected so strongly to calling it a 4080 12 gigabyte and why it got renamed, was that it actually went down to a different GPU. Now, the 4070 is rumored to be on the same AD104, but cut down from the 4070 Ti, and now the 4060 Ti looks like it would be dropping down to AD106. This is going to have, if it has 4,352 CUDA cores, which is what it was talking about with those FP32 units, those are the CUDA cores, that would put it on 34 SMs, and you can see how cut down this is compared to a 4070 Ti. It's not exactly half, but it's, not a lot in comparison. Again, down to 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory that's running slower, right? This is 18 gigabit per second instead of the 21 gigabit per second we're expecting on these. And the 4080 16 gigabyte actually is 22.4, kind of interestingly. Anyway, it's also cutting down the memory bus to 128-bit from the 192-bit that we're seeing on the 4070 Ti and 4070 and the 256-bit that we see on the 4080 16 gigabyte. I guess I don't need to keep saying 16 gigabyte, but anyway. But all of the cut down in the bus and the speed there would drop the memory bandwidth to 288, down from 504 on the 4070 and 4070 Ti and 736 on the 4080. Now, it would come in at around 220 watts of power. So this does look to be pretty significantly cut down. Now, that's fine, and I think even 8 gigabytes is, if it's still targeting 1080p mostly, I think fine. 1440p, I think that's getting a little bit stingy, and I mean, we'll see what kind of performance we get and pricing. Because if it's still priced at $399 like the 3060 Ti, then I think all of that looks great. But if it's taking a $200 or $300 price hike like the rest of the lineup seems to be, then I think that would be pretty concerning, because I would not be wanting to buy a $600 or even $700 graphics card, right? Because where's our pricing going? If the 4080 is $1,200, where's our 4070 Ti? Is that the $900 price point that we had the rumored 4080 12 gigabyte was going to be on? Are they changing the name or the price? And then the 4070, if this is up around $800 or $900, is this, $700 or $800? And does that make this $500, $600, $700? I hope not. 500, I think maybe, because that'd be $100 price hike from last gen. Anyway, we'll see where it all comes out. Let's quit dwelling on that. Like I said, 4070 Ti series leaked once again, so at this point we know pretty much what we're looking at, but you can see the models here from PNY, which I always want to pronounce as Peony, but I don't think that's correct. Anyway, now also in new Nvidia GPU news, we're seeing HP Omen 17 gaming laptop featuring GeForce RTX 4090 16 gigabyte laptop GPU. So basically, we're starting to see leaks coming for laptops. Now, when would we expect to see laptop RTX 40 series? Probably at CES would be what we'd be expecting. Now, this is originally, I guess, a tweet coming from Momomo, who has leaked a lot of hardware stuff in the past. This looks like to be some screenshots of some listings for some various laptops, and we see some featuring a 4090, a 4080, a 4080, 4070, 4060, 4060. So lots of those specs in there. Now, what do we know about the performance of the 40 series mobile? And again, probably coming around CES, which would be early January. Well, back on November 19th, so I've actually shared this before, but back on November 19th, WCCF Tech did leak performance numbers for the entire RTX 40 mobility lineup. Now, whether you trust this leak depends on whether you, trust WCCF Tech to, have accurate information. However, when they published this, they did say that it's from the same source that gave them NVIDIA's 30 series mobility lineup ahead of time, and that did prove to be accurate. So while WCCF Tech hasn't always got all their leaks right, they're saying that this is from the same source where they got an accurate 30 series mobility leak. And then they turned it into their own graph here to help hide the source, basically. And when they published this, they did say that the RTX 4080 Ti listed at the top here, they kind of grayed it out and slashed it and made a note saying they're not sure if this would actually be called a 4090. Like, it'll be the GN21-X11 GPU, but the branding of whether it would be 4080 Ti versus 4090 was unclear. It's looking like, based on what we're seeing here, that it actually is going to be called the 4090, again, assuming any of this was accurate in the first place. But here you can see how the 40 series laptops would stack up against the 30 series laptops. So to be clear, this is not a 3080 Ti desktop card we're looking at performance-wise here, this would be the laptop. So we're looking at Mobility Series lineups compared. So it's looking like the 4070 will actually be faster than 3080 Ti laptop GPU by a decent margin here. And then the 4080, and then this one's looking like it might actually be the 4090, will take a decent jump from there. It's looking like the 4060 is rumored to be, again, if this is accurate, a little bit slower than a 3070 Ti laptop. And then the 4050 will not even be catching up to an RTX 3060 laptop, which is a little disappointing to see. And then the RTX 3050 laptop would be a little bit faster than a 3050 Ti laptop. Now, with all of these laptop specs, the performance can vary wildly depending on the actual power draw and thermal situation going on in the specific laptop you buy. So all of these could swing wildly based on the, like I said, the specific laptop. And again, if you trust this source. Now, moving on to more Nvidia GPU news. If you're going to be buying an RTX 3060 or above desktop GPU, not mobile, but desktop, then it's looking like you can get a free game thrown in with the bundle. You could get Marvel's Midnight Suns by buying a 3060, 3060 Ti, 3070, 3070 Ti, 3080, 3080 Ti, 3090, or 3090 Ti. And I think it has to be purchased before, I don't know. I saw it on here, but maybe I'm blind. I think it was sometime in January. January 6th, there it was. There's the fine print. So if you're interested in Marvel's Midnight Suns and getting a new GPU, maybe that'll sweeten the deal. Now, don't forget that while this isn't new information, I should remind you that AMD is also throwing in game bundles with Dead Island 2 and the Callisto Protocol on most of their 6000 series lineup. Although, if you're buying the 6400 or 6500 XT, you just get Dead Island 2 and not the Callisto Protocol. I'll say I've actually started playing the Callisto Protocol now. They did a patch that fixed a lot of the stutters. It's not perfect. There's a few stutters here and there, but to me it's not egregious. And the main other issue I'm having with the game is the brightness settings are crazy. It's way too bright in HDR, so blacks don't look black, which on an OLED screen is a big deal. And then on the at the standard dynamic range settings, only the sRGB setting actually looks good. The other ones, again, are too bright. So I wish they would fix the brightness settings, especially on the HDR, because I think the game would really pop in HDR. But overall, I'm actually enjoying the Callisto Protocol quite a bit. Now, speaking of OLED, maybe I'll just throw this in at this point in the video. So MSI's next-gen Mag 34 2C QD-OLED gaming display leaks out. So in other words, expect a high-end QD-OLED monitor coming from MSI, and this looks like it'll be a 34-inch ultra-wide. And it's one of its unique features here seems to be this this light bar on the bottom. It seems to have some way to like respond to ambient light in the room or something like that, which is kind of interesting. Overall specs are 3440 by 1440p, so ultra-wide 1440p with a 175 hertz refresh rate, and like I said, a QD-OLED panel. It's looking like it's going to have HDMI 2.1 as well as DisplayPort 2.1 and a mini DisplayPort connector, so very good connection options for you. And it looks like the USB Type-C port can also charge up to 65 watts charging and has a KVM USB hub on the back. So anyway, overall looks like it's going to be good. The question might be, what is the price? Now, jumping over to AMD side of things, we do have the RX 7900 series now launched and available to buy, although how about the AIB board pricing? I was looking if there was a good summary of it anywhere, and Video Cards has us covered. So first of all, at least online, because I tried to buy one online myself, like when they launched in the morning. On Newegg, I got a couple in the cart, but by the time I was actually checking out, it looks like they were out of stock. So I don't know if in-person retail stores maybe still have stock here, because that kind of happened with the 4080. The 4080 seemed to sell out online, but there was some stock left over more in person. I'm not sure what happened in person, but at least my experience was the 7900 XT and XTX sold out online when I tried to buy them. Now, different boards are priced differently here, obviously. The 7900 XTs, it's unfortunate to see that other than the Power Color Hellhound at the $900 MSRP, most of them look to be at least $50 to $80 or even $100 above the MSRP, which, remember, I and pretty much every other reviewer said that the XT is already too expensive at $900, so this isn't good to see. That they're already coming in at the MSRP of the XTX model, which is significantly faster. Remember, guys, buying a better cooler on a worse GPU will never catch up to the performance of a bad cooler on a better GPU, okay? Usually, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say never. I'm sure there's some exception I've missed somewhere in my life. But in general, the performance gap between here in just the overall specs is big enough that just good or bad cooling isn't going to completely close the gap. It's looking like from the XTX model, we had the Gigabyte and Power Color offering a $1,000 MSRP version, but then pretty much everything from there looks like it's marked up at least $100. Looks like $100 for a lot of them, then going into $150, $200, or even $450. Now, ASRock Aqua, I would assume by the name, is probably their liquid-cooled version, which maybe explains why that one would be so much more expensive. But anyway, overall looking like about $100 markup on most of the AIB cards. But again, the market will determine the pricing. And I feel like, especially on the XT model, while the launch versions might sell out, I would imagine that over time, this one is going to have to come down in price. And I actually even think that the XTX model should come down in price as well, but I did a whole other video on that, and I don't want to get sidetracked here. Now, as far as how many launched, going up to launch, there were reports that it was going to be 200,000 RDNA 3 GPUs, but it wasn't clear how those would be split between the two models and how much between regions. And also, this is in Q4, not necessarily on launch day. So maybe we'll start getting a bunch more shipments throughout the month. We'll see. Anyway, we are seeing reports that somebody was able to overclock to 3.7 gigahertz front end and a 3.5 gigahertz shader clock, which is very impressive. Although most reports of the overclocking on these are that while you can push the clock speeds super high, you don't necessarily get a massive performance scaling along with that, right? So like, you know, if you can boost the clock speeds 20%, you don't necessarily get 20% increase in performance. And again, if you're confused on, wait, why are there two different speeds here? Remember that part of AMD's new design here is that they've separated the front end off of the GPU die, and like those are now separated and don't necessarily run at the same speeds. So it's a little bit different now compared to how things used to be. Now, also in AMD GPU news, EK has, according to WCCF Tech, the most Radeon-looking water block. In other words, there are EK Waterblocks announced here for the 7900 XTX graphics card. Looks pretty nice. And I don't know if it's compatible with the reference designs, I believe. And you can look at the full compatibility list if you follow the links in my description if you're interested on this. But yeah, there you go if you are interested in Waterblocks. Now, if you're not interested in Waterblocks, but you're interested in customizing the backplate for your 7900 Red Devil GPU, it's looking like Power Color might have some different options for the backplate design, but it looks like this would only be compatible with the Power Color Red Devil cards, so you couldn't just slap this onto anything as far as I know. But hey, there you go if you're more interested in that look. Now, rounding out the AMD GPU news, we are, of course, seeing a new driver available. It looks like this is mainly just to offer support for the 7900 series, and it does have a few known issues that you could look at, but it looks like nothing much going on there besides compatibility with the new GPUs. Now, if we hop over to Intel graphics, any news? The biggest thing is that Raja Kaduri has been doing some interviews, and in this interview, which I'm seeing reported here at Tom's Hardware, I don't think they did the actual original interview though, he's saying that 200 to 225 watt cards are the sweet spot for the GPU market because that only takes one power connector and it's an easy upgrade for people, and it's the the majority of the market. So when discussing his priorities, he says, my priority at this point is getting that core audience with one power connector. So that's Intel. They're saying that that's their core audience. That's what they want to be targeting. So if you were expecting Intel to come out swinging at the high end anytime soon, that's at least not what Raja Kaduri, who's in charge of their GPU division, is claiming that they're working towards. Now, in Intel CPU news, we are seeing reviews of the i5-13400 versus the 12400 predecessor. And while we'd seen some engineering samples tested, it's looking like actual retail versions of the CPU are available in Asian markets for a while now, even though this officially won't be launched until January with CES. So interesting. Now, as far as the results go, the single-threaded performance looks like it's only 5%, whereas multi-threading tests are a 29% lead, and that's explained by the fact that the 13400 actually has some of those efficiency cores, whereas the 12400 didn't. So, in other words, it's looking like for gaming performance, we probably wouldn't see much difference because of the single-thread performance not being a huge jump. Now, the maximum power draw does jump quite a bit because of those extra efficiency cores being available. It's looking like that, at least in this chart here. Now, in addition to just seeing the 13400 versus the 12400, in general, Intel's 13th gen non-K CPUs have been leaked out in this chart here. So this is coming from apparently a original source here. I'm seeing it reported by Video Cards, but the original source is Chilled Dog, who leaks a bunch of hardware information on Twitter. Says that this is coming from an undisclosed motherboard maker. So this is like motherboard makers' internal testing their 12th gen and 13th gen CPUs side by side. So I would assume these are like on the same motherboard, how are they performing? So it's looking like 13900 versus 12900. And again, these are the non-Ks. That's why this is news, because the non-Ks aren't out yet for the 13 series, which means not overclockable versions, right? And lower power draws. So it's looking like 13900 to 12900 was a 10% performance delta. 13700 versus 12700, and this is single core performance, by the way. So this is what's most likely to transfer to actual gaming performance. Looks like 13700 versus 12700 is a 6% gap. 13600 versus 12600 only a 4% gap. 13500 versus 12500 a 3% gap, and 13400 versus 12400 they're seeing a 6% gap, which is similar to the 5% gap we saw. Reported on the last leak we just saw there. Now, multi-core results are completely different. These are where we're seeing much larger gaps, at least for some of them, due to the increased number of efficiency cores. So in other words, your gaming performance, not a dramatic difference here, but if you're doing productivity that can take advantage of all the core workloads, we're seeing a 53% advantage for the 13.9 versus 12.9, a 34% advantage for 13.7 versus 12.7, 59% advantage for 13.6 versus 12.6, 64% for 13.5 versus 12.5, and 28% advantage for 13.4 versus 12.4. So I think that's overall very interesting. If this is from motherboard makers' internal testing, it's probably fairly accurate, but obviously wait for full reviews and everything. But it's looking like overall for gaming performance differences, it's nothing too exciting. Now, speaking of something that's exciting, how about our Witcher 3 Next Gen update? It launched last night. I actually had a few minutes to try it out, but not enough time to make a video or anything. Are you guys interested in a video on the Witcher 3 Next Gen update? Like how GPUs perform in it? I don't know. People have already done image quality comparisons, so that doesn't seem too interesting. But anyway, we're seeing it's not just updates done by the game developer themselves. They've actually worked in a bunch of popular mod packs to now be officially implemented into the game. This includes HD Reworked Project, HD Monsters Reworked, and I guess some other ones as well. And they're also enabling HDR automatically, but it says that they're working on in HDR calibration setting that's not going to be there at launch. But it looks like overall it's the Witcher 3 HD reworked project mod, HD Monsters reworked mod, immersive real-time cutscenes mod, nitpickers patch, and world map fixes, all officially implemented into the game. I'm actually curious if they had to pay or if they chose to pay the mod developers. That would be kind of interesting to know if their work's being officially implemented in the game. Anyway, in addition, it looks like PC is getting new Ultra Plus settings. So even if you're not going to use the ray tracing part of the ray tracing update, the Ultra Plus settings are still increasing graphic settings compared to the original game. And there's also some new Netflix content and things like that. If you look at the Ultra Plus settings, it looks like there's an increased number of background characters available, increased shadow quality, grass density, texture quality, foliage visibility range, terrain quality, water quality, and detail level. They've also added in DLSS 3 support. I did try out the frame generation with everything maxed out, ray tracing, all of that on my 4090 a bit, off camera. And overall, the frame generation seemed to work really well because your frame rate's already high enough that you don't really notice any increased latency. It's a single-player game on a controller, so latency is not a big deal at all. And the image quality of the frame gen looks pretty good from the few minutes I was able to play. So interesting stuff. The game's also getting normal DLSS and FSR2. Now, speaking of mods, as well as DLSS and FSR2, we're seeing Skyrim. I've been reporting on there being in development a DLSS and FSR2 mod. It also has XESS for Skyrim. Now, what's so interesting about this is that DLSS and FSR2, unlike FSR1, require a lot of information from the game engine, so it was questionable whether a game could be modded to support these because it needs access to motion vectors and all sorts of stuff. So it's one thing to mod in FSR2 to a game that already supports DLSS, which is pretty common, but a game that didn't support either of them, getting it modded in is kind of a big deal. Well, this mod is now available for download. I've not had a chance to test it. And even if you don't get a performance boost from this, you could possibly get an image quality boost by running it at the native resolution just to take advantage of the better anti-aliasing compared to the anti-aliasing that was available in the original game. Also, it is important to note that it's not compatible with certain popular mods like ENB. So they're noting it. You can still use DLAA with ENB since there's no upscaling. So you can take advantage of the better anti-aliasing, but not the actual upscaling, although it's looking like there's a workaround version coming for compatibility. Anyway, there's a lot of patch notes here. If you're interested in this, you could dive in more detail, but I think one of the main goals here was to get VR support, but that does not appear to be up and running quite yet. But overall, that's really interesting. Now, speaking of improving older games through mods, we got Portal RTX, and that's that whole RTX remix thing. Well, what if you just dropped some of the Portal RTX files into other games like Half-Life 2, Max Payne, SWAT 4? Well, some modders are already experimenting with this and getting some massive boosts to the whole lighting system and all of that, because even if you're not updating the assets of the game, like remember Portal RTX updates a lot of the assets, and that was a big part of the image quality gain was the new assets, but also the whole path traced rendering and all of that. Well, we're seeing shots of some of games like Half-Life 2 with Portal RTX dropped in. Now, reports are that this doesn't work perfectly. Certain things don't actually work. Because again, this is not an officially developed mod or anything like that. It's just really just dropping in the results here. I think this is SWAT 4. But again, I wish this was a side-by-side, but I can tell you old games like that didn't usually have lighting that looked this good. So this is a really interesting thing to take a look at. If you want to follow up the link in the description, there is some more information, but keep in mind that some of this is definitely a bit buggy, so it's not perfect. Dying Light 2 mod, speaking of other mods, Dying Light 2 is getting mod support arriving on PC. Well, today was December 13th, so it should be out. And mod tools coming to consoles as well, so interesting stuff there. Dying Light 2 was also recently updated with, I think, some ray tracing updates and a built-in benchmark tool, so interesting stuff there. And GTA 5 has been updated with ray-traced reflections on consoles, at least. I'm not 100% clear if this also happened on PC. But it does look like the PS5 and Xbox Series SX versions were updated with ray traced reflections, which is only available in a fidelity mode, which locks to 30 frames per second, which is the downside. But it's looking like in initial comparisons, which are already up, that the ray traced reflections do look pretty good and are pretty highly detailed. So, anyway, haven't had a chance to explore that myself. But speaking of next-gen consoles, or well, I guess they're current-gen consoles now, but PS5 will be getting a hardware revamp. This is a leak, but from a source who has got PS5 leaks correct in the past. This update will have a detachable drive. I guess the idea here is currently there's a PS5 that has a disk drive and one that doesn't, and there's a price gap there. But it's looking like they're going to be stopping production on these, if this rumor is true, producing a single model, which then has a detachable disk drive that you could add on to it. This would probably save a lot on production costs and like simplify the whole production line if you could just have one console and slot on a disk drive. Apparently, it's already in developer hands and working well, so could be coming soon. Also, last thing I'll leave you guys with is that Watch Dogs Legion has been out for a long time, but it hasn't been available on Steam. A lot of people only buy games on Steam because they don't want to deal with other launchers. Well, there is now a Steam page for Watch Dogs Legion. So it could be, and it's listing a January 2023 release date, so we could be seeing a Steam version of Watch Dogs Legion. Now, whether or not that means that Ubisoft would bring other titles, to Steam that haven't been there, that this is an Ubisoft one, right? Yeah, anyway, because previously it's been exclusive to their own. Anyway, this video's long. We're gonna end it here. I hope all of you have an excellent day.